For all you foodies out there, I'm unwrapping a McDonald's steak, egg, and cheese bagel. Ooh, look at this steak. And the juice running down the side. Got a little bit on the wrapper here. And then the fluffy egg and real cheese folded over the side, looking just so good. Grilled onions and a butter bagel too. Thumbs up for McDonald's steak, egg, and cheese bagel for breakfast. Love it. I participate in McDonald's.
1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men are survivors of sexual abuse or assault. That means you or someone you know has survived an external and internal battle for your soul, which most often no one else will ever see, unless you tell your story. This is Journey On, Survivors Healing from Sexual Abuse and Assault. My name is DJ Burr, and I'm a survivor. I was molested at 16 years old and raped at 18. I didn't know what surviving looked like back then, but I do now. Join me as I talk with survivors and hear their experience, strength, and hope on the road to recovery. Hear our stories and share your own. You are not alone. Good morning and welcome to another edition of Journey On, Survivors Healing from Sexual Abuse and Assault. I'm so excited to have today's guest, David Lorenz, with us today. I saw David on the Netflix original documentary called The Keepers, and he was on there for a split second, but what he said was really powerful and I wanted to interview him. So David, welcome to the show. You're welcome. So let's talk about the 15 seconds that you were on The Keepers for a second. Can you tell our audience, where you're located and how old you are, and then how you ended up on The Keepers?
Sure thing. So I'm 58 years old. I've lived in Maryland for the last 37 years or so. I was born and raised in Kentucky. I moved here to go to school, and when I got here, I met my wife, and I've stayed here ever since. So my abuse happened back in the state of Kentucky. So that was back there, and I'm here. But the biggest obstacle to finding and bringing predators to accountability is the statute of limitations. Sometimes the criminal statute of limitations are wide open. There's no statute of limitations often on criminal cases, but they are on civil cases. And the problem with the fact that we have criminal cases is that usually victims come forward much later in their life, up in their 30s, 40s, 50s kind of thing. And at that point, evidence is pretty thin, and prosecutors don't have much to work with, so they don't usually take those cases on. Now, if you can file a civil case, you can start the process of discovery, and then once you get that discovery because of the civil case, because you own that as a person, not the prosecutor, you can usually get prosecutors interested because you've discovered evidence through the process of disclosure. So we've been working on trying to increase the statute of limitations in the state of Maryland. When I first moved here, the statute of limitations, I think, was 2 years after the event or after the age of majority, which is 18 years old. So if you were over 20 years old, you couldn't file a civil suit, which is ridiculous.
That is
so
ridiculous.
We got that. Yes, it's just anybody who thinks a survivor is going to come forward at the age of 20 doesn't understand this issue at all. So I've been doing this for a number of years. I've been going down. We did get it moved a little bit. It was a bit of a compromise. After we got it moved, we almost all regretted it because we moved it from 2 years to 7 years. That meant you get to age 25. But again, my anecdotal evidence, and this is anecdotal, I have no study to back this up, but just I run a support group here for survivors. Excuse me. And my experience is that survivors, of a small percentage of survivors come forward almost right away. It's a small percentage, but some of them will tell their parents or whatever, and they come forward. But the majority, the 90% or so, if they don't come forward, they don't come forward right away. And they won't come, if they don't come forward right away, they won't come forward for decades. Usually 30 is about the earliest. So moving it from 20 to 25 gains nothing, almost nothing. So we got it moved, but we've been trying to move the bar farther and farther and farther. And so I have spent since I got on board on this effort, probably around 2007, so about 10 years ago, And I've been going down and testifying before the legislature pretty much every year to try to get the statute of limitations for civil cases moved or eliminated. Eliminated would be the best. And at the same time, and if we can't get it eliminated completely, we want to open up a retroactive window of about a year to 2 years where old cases that were not allowed by the existing law are now allowed for a 1 or 2 year period of that sort. So that was the clip in the Keepers is a small section of my testimony. When we go down and testify, you're limited to 2 minutes, and so 15 seconds that's on the Keepers is an eighth of my testimony that day.
But it was impactful. It was impactful to me because you were talking about something that I'm really passionate about, and that is, in my opinion, we should abolish the statute of limitations for these cases. On the first season of Journey On, I shared my experience and actually included the audio of me going into the police station to report the abuse that happened to me when I was 16. And I'm almost 35 now, and so what I heard when I got to the police station was, 16 is the age of consent in Georgia, so there would have been no criminal, case, and 2, even if they had found that there was some legal standing, the statute of limitations would have lapsed already.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was crazy.
Yeah, I was abused at the same age, at the age of 16, and they actually did file a criminal case against the priest who abused me. He was. They had enough people who were under the age of 16, but in the process, I was thinking of stepping forward. Now, I hadn't told anybody. I was 32 years old. I still had not told anybody. I struggle with the idea of going and becoming one of the plaintiffs in that case. And I'll tell you, I was almost relieved to find out that I had the same case as you were, that it was considered consensual because I was over the age of 16, which is absolutely absurd, as you know. But part of me was relieved because that meant I couldn't join the lawsuit against him, and that meant I didn't have to testify, and I was scared to death to think that I would have to testify in public, and I really didn't want to do it. Now, it turns out they had, by the time I called, I found out that, or even thought about calling, I found out they kind of shut it down and said, we had so many people testifying that we don't need any more. So that was good. And they put him in jail for 20 years.
Can we take a moment and go back a bit, to when you were that 16-year-old? I'm curious what was going on in your life before this assault happened, this abuse happened to you.
Oh, there's a lot of things that were going on in my life. I was a young kid at an all-boys high school. It was a parochial school, it was a Catholic high school. And I was one of 10 kids. I was the 7th of 10, good Catholic family. It was a good family. It was a happy family. I will say that being 7th, I was a little bit lost in it, I think. I was no standout by any means. And being 7th, you kind of ignored, and especially being 7th right in front of a set of twins, you even got a little bit more ignored. So, I mean, I didn't notice it, and I don't know that I cared, but I probably didn't get a lot of attention. And so the attention that I got from this priest when I went to this high school, he was the guidance counselor at an all-boys high school. I think I really gravitated to him, and as did a lot of people, because he was a cool priest. He told us what was what we wanted to hear, and things like that. And he was grooming everybody. It turns out he's pretty much. I graduated with a class of I want to say 72. I'm not sure that's the right number, but it's around that number. And from what I understand, he pretty much abused every kid in my class.
That's horrible.
Classes. I know that I was the 52nd person of my class to file a suit or to file a complaint, not a suit. Because I went to the diocese and I said I want to get, and somewhere around 2002, I went to the diocese and said, I want to get counseling and I want you to pay for it. And they sent me a case number, and the case number indicated I was the 52nd person from my class to file. Anyway, the circumstances of the abuse, I know some guys were, some of the victims were touched through clothing, others were recurring abuses. And it was, masturbation kind of stuff and things like that. Mine was a single event. I don't know exactly how to describe it. The best thing I know is I spent a lot of time at this priest's house. He had a house by himself, a huge mansion, by the way, and he lived by himself. And we would go over there and have gatherings and parties and things like that. And we did that a lot, and it wasn't uncommon for a lot of us to spend the night. And that, our parents thought, this is great. We're spending time with a priest. This is a wonderful thing. He was being transferred out of the area, and me and a couple of guys, we had a party for him, and we celebrated, and I spent the night there. And in the morning he came into my room and abused me, and so that, because he was leaving the area, it did not have a chance to recur. So he was gone the next day, and I didn't even see him for another 8 months.
Wow.
So it was a single event.
I imagine you must have been scared and confused.
All of it. I was scared to go home because I thought I had a scarlet letter across my chest on top of my head somewhere, that if my parents saw me, they'd know what happened, and I'd be in big trouble. I thought, I was just going to be in major trouble.
Like it was your fault.
But the other, I believed it was my fault all the way. And then the other thing that I thought is, and I had this conflicting thing, because up until that point, you're 16, your parents have kind of always looked out for you. You're kind of stepping out on your own, but not totally. And when you screw up, your parents always still seem to catch you. And I struggled with the idea, why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you stop? I had that conflict going on. I don't want you to see me because I don't want you to know what I did, but why didn't you stop? Where were you?
Mm-hmm.
Where you take care of me, and you didn't. So I had a lot of that conflict going. I moped around for weeks, just not knowing what to do. I remember when I first got home, I just went into the living room and sulked on the couch for a while. And I'm sure I don't know what my mom or dad thought of that, but I remember I wanted to go up and take a shower and clean myself off. It was just get into the shower, and I was too lethargic to even do that. But I've always related that to, since that time, I've heard of a lot of women who are rape victims often take a shower right after they are raped because they want to clean it off. And I can really relate to that feeling, because that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I can too.
I wanted to go and clean it up somehow. So
goodness.
That's it in a nutshell, I guess. But you're right. It was a very difficult time. But slowly I managed to kind of get my life back together and get myself in order before I went back to school that next year.
So you said you were moping around the house. Did your parents check in with you? Did they ask what was going on?
No, not at all. Like I said, I'm a 7 to 10 kid, and when somebody gets mopey and they're teenagers, I don't know how I looked. I know how I felt inside, and I know I was mopey. But no, they didn't. I wasn't asked one thing about it at all. I know that months later, my mom would ask So my younger brother went to the same high school. I was the first one in my family to go to that high school. My younger brother went later. And I remember my mom saying things like, "Oh, I wish my brother would get in contact with Father Bierman like you were. I think that would be good for him. He needs something like that." And I just remember being absolutely horrified and thinking to myself, this can't go anywhere. But if it starts to go somewhere, I am going to have to step in, because there's no way I'm going to let my brother John anywhere near that guy. But I was hoping she wouldn't take it any farther, and she never did.
Well, thank goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how I would have reacted, because I would be too scared to step up, or too. I don't know what I would have done. I probably would have turned to my brother John and said, "Don't hang around." But I don't think I would have done anything with my mom, because I would be afraid.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a lot of fear too.
Yeah. Now, I wasn't. Some people are feared that their parents will beat them or something. And I've been asked that. Were you afraid your dad would beat you or your mom would beat you? And I wasn't afraid of that. I was afraid of their reaction to that. First of all, I guess I would be afraid I wasn't believed. And if I was believed, they would be accusatory and blame me. And then you're from a slightly different. If you're in your 30s, right? Is that what you said?
Uh-huh.
So I grew up 20 years before you, and at that time, maybe it's the same when you grew up, maybe not. But when I grew up, one of the worst things you could have said to somebody is you're queer, you're a homo.
Oh, absolutely.
And I was afraid that somebody would accuse me of that. I was scared to death. And I apologize to anybody who's listening who is gay. I mean, I don't feel that way. I have a daughter who I love dearly, who is a lesbian, and she's married to a wonderful woman. And I would, but when we grew up, that was the insult. And I was afraid.
It was the same. I hear you. It was the same insult when I was growing up, and I am gay, and so it was like, well, I don't want anyone to find out, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't even know what to do with that information. In fact, I was abused almost immediately after coming out of the closet, because I was left vulnerable because I was tossed out of my house.
Yeah. I can see that. I like I said, I run a support group, and I find that quite a number of our survivors are gay, and I think it's somehow being gay makes you vulnerable, and I think abusers, from what I've heard, and I talked to a friend of mine is a counselor, and she actually worked at one of these counseling centers for abusive priests, and she says, you talk to any one of them, and they can walk into a room full of 50 kids, and they can tell you, they can pick out the 5 kids in there that are vulnerable. They can do it in minutes. They can find them. And I think people who have people who are gay or other sexual differences, I think just make them vulnerable, and there must be a target on their back somehow when those abusers see them.
I think it could be around the sexual orientation piece, but I think the vulnerability is about maybe kids who are growing up in broken homes where there's violence or there's emotional abuse. And I think you can pick that up. You can pick that up on the street.
Yeah. I think there's a number of reasons I think make people vulnerable. And you're right, broken homes is a big one. But I related that part only because it seems to me like there's a higher percentage of gay people who seem to be or come to my survivor support group. And again, that's purely anecdotal. I don't have any study evidence that suggests that. It just seems to be a large number, and from that age group too.
Yeah.
From our age group, where that was still a taboo thing to be, and I'm hoping that aspect of it goes away as we as a society, become more open to the different sexual lifestyles.
I hope so. I think we still got a ways to go, but I'm grateful that you're providing a space for people to come and process their pain and get support.
Yeah, it's pretty rewarding. The number of people who come through, when they come through, they just, I would say their biggest relief is finding out that they're not the only one.
Right.
That they're not alone.
That's why I'm doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there are millions of us survivors out there, and if we reach one person, I'm satisfied, right? If that one person decides to get help from him or herself, I'm ecstatic about that. So that's why I continue to do the work that I do. I'm curious what your recovery process has looked like. When did it come to your awareness that you needed to reach out for support, and what that support looked like?
Oh, that's a long story. I'll try and summarize it as quick as I can. So somewhere around the age of 25, I started realizing that this thing was hanging over me. But I say to people, the longer you live a lie, the harder it is to come out from under the lie. And, I've been living a lie now. I was married at 23. I've been married for 35 years. And I did not tell my wife what happened to me. And so about 25, I had my first kid, and maybe that was the impetus to that, where I started realizing that this thing is sitting in the back of my head, and it's bothering me. And at one point I thought about going to, and I also suspected that this priest was abusing other kids. So I thought about going to the authorities or something. But an event, I talked to somebody about it, one person, a friend of mine, and mentioned that, that I thought Bierman was an abuser. And he said, oh, he was, but he's not anymore. And that was enough for me to back down, go away, and never come back to it again. So I didn't do that. When I turned 32 or 33, somewhere around there, another friend of mine outed this guy, said he'd been abused by this guy for like 3 years. And that's when everything kind of came out, and there were hundreds of victims came forward. That's where I thought I might have to testify. But I'll tell you what happened is, so between 25 and 33, I'm kind of wanting to tell people, but I keep digging myself deeper and deeper into this hole, and I didn't know how to get out of it. How do you tell someone that you've been, that you're married to for 10 years, that you've been lying to them for 10 years? How do you even start that conversation? I didn't know how to do that. I didn't have the equipment to do that. So anyway, when he was accused, actually my mother called me and told me that Bierman was, being accused of these horrible, horrible things. And I said, yeah, I kind of heard that. And she said, did he do anything to you? And that was the first time I said yes. Someone asked me point blank, did anything happen to you? And I said yes. And then my wife wasn't home at the time. She was out. When she came home, I explained the whole thing to her. That was a very, very difficult time. And then I sort of went, it was a difficult process. I told a bunch of people, and I got a lot of real good support from people, actually from my church. People were very supportive of what happened, and I didn't immediately seek out counseling, but so that was around 92, and then 2002, I kind of went underground and kept it quiet. Didn't really, I didn't stand up and say anything about it, but I didn't. I wouldn't deny it, and I would talk about it to people who wanted to talk about it, but nobody did too much. But in 2002, the whole Boston thing broke, and I said, my silence has got to stop. Not only can I not just be sort of keeping my head low, I have to stick my head up, because it's got to happen. And it was about that time, that's when I started losing support from my church, because I'm sitting there saying, this church has got to change. We got to fix this problem. Well, that's not what people want to hear. They want to hear that the church is perfect and that there's not a problem.
And this was after the Spotlight article that came out.
This was after. Correct. And then and it was about that time when I started losing friendships over it that I started realizing I got a deeper problem. So I've gone So I went and got a counselor, and that's when I approached the diocese about getting help with the counselor. And I've been in and out of counseling a number of times. I think it's a process. This whole recovery thing, this whole healing thing, it's a process. And I'm to the point now that when people call me and say they want to be better, I said, we can help you get better, but we can't put you back to where you were. I said, I just don't think you can quite get there. I said, it's like, it's like you get a broken leg and we can fix you up and you can walk again and you will get better. Or a broken leg is probably not nearly as severe as the trauma that some of these people have gone through. So I don't mean to minimize it, but, it's like the analogy being you broke your leg and if you don't take care of it, you'll never walk again, but we can help you walk again. And through counseling and support, you can get back on your feet and walk, but you might always have a bit of a limp.
Right.
And we can never quite get that. And every once in a while, I have to go back to counseling because I realize that, not only have I not gotten rid of my limp, but because I've been limping around for a while, I've made other parts of my life worse. So like right now, about a year and a half ago, I realized that I was just not, I was losing my temper with everybody. And I just couldn't, I would just snap at anything. So I went back into counseling and that's been very useful to me is to get counseling to help me back to where I was. And I think that it's a process that you come and get yourself better, and that's fine. And you can function fairly well with very little residue, but every once in a while something happens and you got to go back and get fixed up again.
Absolutely. I support that. There's layers to the trauma that we have suffered. And so we do need to get a tune-up or a refresher every once in a while if we're not still in ongoing weekly therapy. So that's really good. That's a great message to put out there, is that we can go in to get this treatment, but we still need to go back periodically for, a tune-up because we've been through trauma.
Yeah. Exactly. And there are so many different, as you said, layers of trauma. And sometimes, something will trigger it and you can't undo it by yourself. You just need help working it out. And I don't know we don't know what's going to trigger it, Going back to the leg analogy, you're walking fine, you have a bit of a limp, you fall down the steps and you aggravate that break again. Well, now you got to go back to the doctor and get it fixed up. And the same thing with trauma. You pretty much got it worked out, but something happens and you aggravate it and you just need help getting out of it. Mm-hmm. So I've gone through therapy a number of times. I would say probably since 92. I had and some of it pretty intense, but probably 4 different times.
Okay. All right. And has your family been supportive of you going in and out of treatment?
Oh yeah, my wife's my wife's as supportive as anybody. Actually, if you watch The Keepers, you might, before I actually show up on The Keepers, I'm actually in the background of several other people testifying. Mm-hmm. And there's a woman sitting next to me, and that was my wife, and she also testified that same day.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
She's very good at giving the perspective of what I'll call the collateral damage to abuse. What happens to families as a survivor works through their issues. And I just got back. I spent the weekend at a SNAP conference. I assume you're familiar with SNAP?
I'm familiar with SNAP. Can you tell our audience about SNAP?
Yeah, sure. SNAP stands for Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. It started out as that. We've pretty much worked our way out to just be Survivors Network because we try to reach out to victims, survivors of all kinds of sexual abuse. And I think we're one of the largest support group networks in the country, if not the world. It's certainly very old. It was started back in 1990, I think. and they have a conference every year, and they have workshops and breakout sessions and things like that. And my wife and another woman actually run a breakout session during that time, which caters to family members of survivors, not the survivors themselves. We have workshops for the survivors and support groups for the survivors, but we also run a support group for family members who are struggling to understand what their loved one is going through, and especially spouses. It really wreaks havoc on marriages, and spouses just have a hard time understanding where some of the anger and the bitterness and the confusion in their spouse is coming from. They don't fully understand. And so my wife runs that support group. So she's been very supportive.
That's an excellent resource to have, because, when we come into relationships and create families, we bring all our stuff with us, right?
Yeah, we certainly do.
And sometimes we unpack it at unexpected moments, and so it's good for the family to have some resources as well. How have your children been impacted by your story and your recovery journey?
I'm sorry, this makes me a little emotional.
Oh, I understand.
Thinking when it happened in '92, my youngest daughter was 2 years old, and I had two through 8, I guess, at the time, and that was in '92, and my wife said, "Well, at some time we're going to have to tell the kids," and I said, "Yeah, I know," and then time went on, and I thought, "Oh God, please, I don't have to. It looks like I won't ever have to tell my kids." But when in 2002 broke and I became more active in it, my wife turned to me and said, "You have to tell them." I said, "Yeah, I know I do." And it was the hardest thing I ever did, was sit my kids down and tell them that their dad couldn't protect himself, and he's not this perfect, what they maybe thought was perfect guy. And it was really, really hard to sit them out. They reacted wonderfully. I just can't believe how well they took that in and worked with it. And they've been supportive, actually, over the years, as I've been more active in it. They've come to events that I hold, and they are very supportive of it. So they've been very good.
That's beautiful.
But it was hard to tell them. That was really, really hard.
Yeah, it sounds like you may have experienced some feelings of shame around that. Would you say that's accurate?
Oh, yeah. You could name a lot of things that I feel around it. Shame is certainly one of them, and I still, there's still this little bit of shame that goes with it, and it's hard to get rid of that. I think that's the one thing it's hard to get. The funny thing is, and I say this story a lot of times to people, I've had about 50 people come through my support group, and it's amazing, because you sit down and they tell their story at some point in this group, and every one of them this is universal. I don't think I have one person who doesn't look at the other person and tell them it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Every one of them, all 50 of them, will look at the other 49 and say, it's not your fault. But when they look at themselves, they'll say, yeah, but it is my fault.
Oh, I know.
And you can go around the room. Not all 50 have been in the same room at the same time, but every one of them will claim some responsibility for what happened to themselves, but they'll relieve that responsibility from everybody else. They'll understand. They'll listen to the story and say, my God, you were manipulated. You were this, you were that. You were young. It was this. For all the right things. They'll say all the right things to everybody else, but they won't say the right thing to themselves.
Shame is powerful.
It is.
It is
really
so powerful. And for me, it drove me into addiction. And for many survivors, I think it takes us down dark and dangerous paths as we try to heal. Because for part of us, the addiction piece is part of the healing. We don't want to be in pain. But what we don't realize is that that causes destruction too. Is that part of your story?
I never, for some reason, I don't understand it, because it seems like just about almost everybody I meet at some point got involved in addiction. I did not. And it might be that I got addicted to a more productive. I was kind of a bit of a workaholic at one point.
Okay.
And maybe that was my. But that always looks good, There's nothing illegal about that. There's nothing, everybody thinks, wow, he's a hard worker, I don't know that stuff, but I never got involved in drugs or alcohol or anything like that. And I can't explain it.
Well,
I have no explanation for that.
That's definitely something to be grateful for. But, the workaholism, I hear that too. And I admit that's part of my story too, overworking to compensate for how I'm feeling. And so I have to keep that in check too. Yeah.
You're always trying to prove yourself because you feel somehow inadequate, right?
Right.
And I still do that. I've managed not to be too much of a workaholic anymore, but there's still this piece of me that's trying to prove that I'm worthy somehow.
Mm-hmm. And it's just, the work is we have to continue to tell ourselves that we're worthy regardless of what we're doing, or those, or who we're helping, or those things, right? Because we all have value, and right. But the abuse shatters that, and we have to piece it back together, and it is so hard to do, but worth it. At least that's been my experience. And helping others come to understand that they are worthy and that they are loved, I think is part of that healing process.
Yes.
So how long has your group been meeting?
Probably about the same time I got involved in the statute of limitations, 2007, so to speak. That's when I became, between 2002 and 2007, I sort of kept an arm's length from SNAP.
Okay.
I was busy trying to. I felt like if I could just say the right thing to the right bishop within the Catholic Church, I could solve this problem.
Right.
And I kind of found out that's the Catholic bishops are not the least bit interested in solving this problem at all. They're not. They're interested in hiding it. They're not interested in solving. And so that's when I sort of morphed over into working with SNAP, and that's when I got more involved. Started a support group because I realized that in doing all that, I found out that historically, so I didn't grow up in this area. So what I found out is historically there had been a pedophile ring right in my neighborhood.
Oh no!
And so priests in the three churches that were around me, there were priests who were trading kids back and forth and bringing them over to each other. And I didn't know that because I moved into the area after that happened and after it had been exposed. But as I worked with the church, I started discovering these documents and realizing that there was a need. So I started a support group hoping that I could reach out to some of the victims of that. And that got me involved in that. I actually went to the church and said, you need a support group. You need to develop a support group for these people to come talk to so they can talk to each other because they need to talk to each other. They need to know that they're not alone. And the church refused to do that. I couldn't get the bishop to buy off on that. He says, no, they don't need that. It's not something they need. And it was absolutely something they need. And so that's kind of that made me move towards something else. And I found SNAP, and it's been a blessing ever since.
Well, thank goodness that you took the initiative to create that support group. It sounds like it's a great resource, and every city and every state should have support groups available for survivors. And so
they really should.
They really should. So I really appreciate the ongoing work that you're doing. Can you talk a bit about what's coming up for you? Like, are you going before any any judicial, bodies to advocate any further?
Well, we will. The General Assembly meets in January of every year, so they did actually pass a bill which was window dressing last year, and it kind of got off. So we may take a year off and not do anything this year, but we'll come back next year because we need to let the dust settle over this window dressing bill that got passed. So
Okay.
we'll probably leave that alone. Maybe take a year off. Maybe not. I'm kind of thinking about that. But we won't be doing anything like that. We are trying to collect information. I'm working with actually I just talked with some of the women from the Keepers at the SNAP conference, and they live right around here.
Mm-hmm.
And they are, I'm probably going to start a support group up there, more closely where they are. They told me that they could use that. And the other thing is helping them maybe collect some data, because they're getting calls from, ever since the Keepers, they're getting flooded with calls of people with some tidbit of information. And so that whole Keepers series is motivated people who maybe didn't think they had anything significant to contribute to call in and give them information.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm not privy to that information. I'm not privy to that at all. All I know is they're being inundated with it.
Yeah, I follow the ladies from the Keepers on their Facebook page, and
oh, do you?
Yeah, the numbers continue to increase of many people are joining and adding valuable information to the discussion. And I just appreciate them all being so vulnerable and being willing to share their experiences with the world. And I think the series itself has really captivated the world. And I think people are willing to come forward because they could see that there are a number of people who are there waiting to support them. And that's what we need. We have to continue to put that image and that message out there that you will be supported when you come forward. Yeah.
And I will say, I don't know if you remember one of the people in there, Teresa Lancaster, who was a mass-kill victim who became a lawyer.
Yes.
I had a little bit of a conversation with her, and I asked her, I said, so how are you guys doing? Are you getting, what kind of response are you getting? She said she has gotten emails and letters and phone calls from around the world, and she says, I have yet to receive one negative piece of feedback. And I said, oh, that is terrific.
That's a blessing.
Nothing but support, she says. 100% support.
That's great. That's so wonderful.
So it's good that kind of thing. It is, because that was not always the case where you got positive feedback. It was usually people would call you a liar or this or that. And that still happens, and it's very unfortunate. But I think people's eyes are starting to open up that, when somebody yells abuse, they're not just in it for the money. They're serious.
Yeah.
It's usually something happened.
Exactly. Something happened. Before we close, I wanted to touch base with you around spirituality. And I wonder if you're comfortable sharing kind of what your evolution has been around your spiritual practice and what your connection is with God or a higher power of your understanding.
So the part that I haven't mentioned is, my wife and I were so involved in our church, in our Catholic church. And it was a wonderful environment. We raised our kids in that. My kids spent so much time down at the church, it was ridiculous. We were involved in all kinds of groups, all kinds of things. And then when I started becoming active, like I said, in 2002, in calling the church to accountability, I had a lot of friends who I thought were friends who started saying, I had a phone call from somebody I thought was a very, very close friend telling me, how dare I say anything like this? I'm like, what are you talking about? It's true. I mean, this is all true. And so that kind of started a downward spiral as as I got more and more resistance, I became more and more firm in my conviction that something had to be done. And that caused more and more people to turn against me, which was more resistance, which caused me to, get my gander up even more. So about 4 years into that, we decided that we could no longer be at that church. And so we went to another Catholic church, which was a more independent Catholic church. We were there for a couple of years and happy, but we still couldn't. It was like we couldn't understand why people were not upset with this abuse issue. And they kept saying, well, it's gone. It's not gone. And you could give them data and evidence and everything else that says it's not gone, and they just didn't want to hear it. And I go, if you're not angry about the fact that your church is hiding child sexual abuse, what the hell is there to be angry about? Apparently nothing will make you angry, and nothing will dispel you. And I began to realize and come to realize that maybe this Catholic Church is really a bit of a cult. And they've locked people in, and people just believe. They'll come up, they'll preach from the pulpit that the abuse issue is gone, and people will just buy it, and they won't look anywhere else or look for evidence that says otherwise. And so I kind of believe we got into a cult. So my wife and I left the Catholic Church, and I will say that we were very active, but we weren't just people being active. We were both very, very spiritual people, and very much a strong connection to God and to each other and to our community, and we believe that. And it was supported by that church. And since we've left the church, that's been difficult. And though I still consider, I still believe in a God who's, a wonderful being. I have found that not having a community to support that is difficult, and we're still searching. We're searching for some kind of community that we feel like we can call our own, or I don't know. We're searching.
Well,
but we do have a sense. We have a sense of spirituality and a sense of God.
I'm glad to hear that you're still searching. What happens for some of us is that our concept of God is shattered when abuse happens. Yeah. And I think whether you call it God or you call it higher power, I think it's always beneficial to have something outside of yourself, outside of another person, a person who is fallible. I think it's beneficial to have something to turn to,
yes,
as a power greater than yourself to rely on, to give you hope and guidance. And that's what's been helpful to me. And so I just really appreciate that you're still willing to search for that, even though you don't have that community of support yet. And I imagine that it's just around the corner, and you'll find a new home where you guys can have fellowship with other people who will support you and love you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience, strength, and hope with our audience, and
thank you.
And continue doing the work that you're doing, and advocating for all survivors in your community, and keep putting the message out there, by going to those conferences and such, because we need more voices like you. So thank you so much,
and thank you for what you do. I appreciate it.
Yes. Well, you're welcome back anytime. If you're going to get another 15 minutes on The Keepers Season 2, let me know.
The funny story was, real quick funny story about that. I didn't know I was on The Keepers. I did not know it.
That's hilarious.
Until I was on episode 3 when an email arrived from a friend of ours who had just finished watching episode 7 and said, "You did wonderful on it." And I said, "Oh my God, I'm in it." I didn't know it.
They didn't have to get your signature? Probably not, because it was a public forum, right?
It was public testimony, so they didn't need it.
Oh, wow.
I would have given it anyway, but yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being on this show. Do you can you give out the web address for SNAP and Any other resources that you think might be helpful?
Sure. It's the SNAP website is SNAP Network, all one word, snapnetwork.org. And it's a wonderful resource. And there's a resource page on that for other places you can go and turn to. There's what is that one that I use every once in a while? I can't remember it. I'm sorry. I wish I could.
Well, that's all right. If you find it, just let me know and I'll share it.
Sure. Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's Adult Survivor or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Might be all one word.
Well, thank you so much for your time, sir, and I appreciate you and the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you. It was nice talking to you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me for this awe-inspiring episode of Journey On. I invite you to get in touch with me if you want to share your story. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter at DJBurr1022 and on Instagram at TheDJBurr. Survivors are also welcome to join our private Facebook group, Journey On Survivors, at www.facebook.com/groups/JourneyOnSurvivors. And finally, the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the person sharing them. Take what you like and leave the rest. I encourage survivors to share their stories authentically, and I believe every guest on my show has. I value the strength and courage it takes to publicly share our recovery journeys. Please respect yourselves and each other. Till next time, breathe deep and journey on.
Roofers, are you tired of using a bunch of selling tools that don't talk to each other? Streamline your selling process with GAF Project. Manage leads, measurements, presentations, estimates, even payments, right on your iPad. Visit gaf.com/project. Roofers, are you tired of using a bunch of selling tools that don't talk to each other? Streamline your selling process with GAF Project. Manage leads, measurements, presentations, estimates, even payments, right on your iPad. Visit gaf.com/project.